Oh, look at that.
All right, folks, looks like we are live. Good morning and welcome to another Coffee with Rich. As you can tell from my split screen, I'm joined by Dr. T.C. Fuller. Good morning, T.C.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. While we are waiting for folks to jump on, I am going to see if I can't go ahead and pull this up here. And let's see here. It may take a second.
No worries.
There we go. We are on, sir.
Oh.
Looks like we got people jumping on already. If you're just joining us, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. As you can see, I am joined by a true man of letters this morning, Dr. T.C. Fuller.
Good morning, folks. I'm
Good
impressed
morning.
we're up this early to hear what we have to say, Rich.
I know, they're gluttons for punishment. Let's see who we got on this morning. We got Alan on, Mr. Will Parker's on, Jason is on. Good morning. Will, hope you're doing well out there in Montana, awful early where you're at. Ellen Kelly from Virginia. Good morning, sir. Up to 16 people this morning. Mr. Bob Bill. All right, looks like we got almost 20 people on this morning, TC. It's 6:30. What do you say we get started?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, folks. So as always, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. We're joined with Dr. T.C. Fuller, and I thought that he would be a very good guest to have on right after we had on his friend and mine, Andrew Branca, attorney Andrew Branca. And T.C. wrote a book that we're going to be talking about primarily this morning. Reasonable, Justified, and Necessary. And that's going to be the subject of today's Coffee with Rich. TC, those that don't know you that well like I do, can you tell them a little bit about your background?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm a Taurus and I'm from California and I like long walks on the beach. Yeah, shockingly, I did actually learn to shoot in California. That's how old I am.
Wow.
Grew up out there, was a UC Santa Cruz banana slug for a year, go slugs. Then I was invited to pursue my academic career elsewhere. So I moved down to Fresno State, got into ROTC, went on active duty with the Army. Spent several years as an infantryman, was an infantry platoon leader for the first Gulf War, was in Germany for a long time. Then eventually the Army saw fit to make me an ordnance officer, which, left me with a big case of umbrage. So I applied for Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and I applied for explosive ordnance disposal at the same time. EOD came back first, so I jumped in with them. Was fortunate enough to get a couple of commands, right back to the Middle East for a while, and finished up at Fort Bragg. And then I took a flyer and applied to the FBI, thinking, hey, they hire adults. They're not going to hire me, but what the heck, I'll roll the dice. They got to hire somebody, right?
True.
And sure enough, I got in and asked to go to San Francisco. So they sent me to Vermont. And because anybody that's ever worked for the government understands that particular issue. Spent a lot of time in Vermont, got into competitive shooting, got into graduate school, finished a master's degree, and then decided, what would be fun is going into a doctorate. I was wrong, but I did finish it. Then I was fortunate enough to get off onto the management track, went down to Quantico and taught firearms at the firearms training unit, Quantico, for a while at our academy for several years. And then finished up working cases back in Charlotte, North Carolina. And now I retired. And so now I run a small private investigations consulting business and do some writing here on the side.
All right. Is it true that TC stands for Tango Charlie? Is that for real?
There's a whole raft of stuff that you could substitute in there. Some of it is not fit for human consumption at this early hour, but sure, Tango Charlie works. A lot of people just call me T because I guess 2 syllables is a little difficult. As long as you're not calling me late for dinner, right?
Right. Hey, go ahead, guys, like and share. If you're a coin member of the American Warrior Society, tell me what your coin number is, where you're from. You definitely don't want to miss it. Let's see who's on here, TC, before we get going much further. I see Nova is on. Joseph is on. Razmik says, good morning, Rich and Doctor. Bob says, good morning, guys. John Jacques says, good morning, Rich. Coin number 308. Let's see here. Donald says, good morning, sir. Doug Rhines is on. Penny is on. Says, go Woodchucks. Kevin is on. Says, good morning, Rich. Rich is on. Good morning, Rich and TC. Mr. Doug Lightfoot, good morning, sir.
Oh, Mr. Lightfoot.
Yeah, lots of good people here. Dr. John Eden, Brian Lakatosh. We were in the Marine Corps together. Good morning, Brian.
Wow.
Yeah, you must be old, Brian. Mark is on. Let's see here. Gosh, got a lot of folks on. 34 folks on. Please like and share. We are going to go ahead and get into it. TC, tell us a little bit about this book and kind of what made you write this and the fact that you wrote it under a nom de plume. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Let's start with the nom de plume because that's the easiest one. I was still an active agent at the time, and I really didn't want to put up with sort of the professional and personal kind of razzing that could befall me if I put my name out there on an actual book. It was interesting. The Bureau didn't really have a problem with me putting my name on a book. They had other problems that I had to kind of deal with because it's just a huge bureaucracy, but they didn't really have a problem with that. I just didn't want to bump into somebody on the street that had my name or that had put my name out there on that sort of scale while I was a working agent. And then, of course, your buddies, as soon as they see your name on a book, then it's kind of on like Donkey Kong. And I didn't really feel like dealing with that either. So, and at the time, when I started the book, I was also writing for gun magazines. And I was using that name as well. So I figured, well, I'll just slide in there and do what I got to do. Of course, now that I'm retired, it's completely unnecessary. But at the time, it was a good idea.
Right. Okay. So what led you to that subject matter or that topic? Why did you choose that?
Well, it's interesting. I kind of got inspired by On Combat and then later On Killing by Dave Grossman's work. And what I saw at the time was, okay, Mr. Grossman had come out with, Colonel Grossman had come out with, a lot of really solid information on what happens to individuals when we, ask them to kill other people in a societally approved context. He concentrates mostly on soldiers. He does touch on law enforcement. We have people in our society that have the approbation of our society to administer deadly force. So I thought, well, we have this info. Why are we not using it to inform our training paradigms? We know all this new good stuff and it's solid, and we can expand the research and do more research in these areas. But what we have should be influencing what we're training, and it's not. So I thought, well, we should improve our training methodologies. And so I started out by writing my dissertation. And my master's thesis touched on it, and then my dissertation for my doctorate touched on it. And then when I finished, I thought, I want to be part of this conversation. I'm not terribly dogmatic about things. I'm not like my way. It's the Fuller technique. I don't do that, but I wanted to be part of the conversation. I thought it was a conversation that should be had. And I thought I wanted to add to that body of work, throw my hat in the ring as perhaps someone that had something to say on the topic.
Yeah. And speaking of having something to say on the topic, the show that I'm going to direct our viewers to this morning is going to be show number 159. And that's where you were actually the guest, TC. And so if you want to learn more about Dr. Fuller and some of the things that he's done in his background, I would encourage you to check out the show notes today. And there's a link in there to the show that we did with TC Fuller back in show number 159. And if you want to get a sample of his writing, you can obviously check out his book, and I'm sure TC will tell us where we can pick that up at. But you can also read an article that he wrote on ammunition selection, because I believe you were with the Bureau Firearms Training Unit when they did the 9mm switch. Is that correct?
I was. I'm not going to try and tell you that I was the impetus behind that, because I wasn't, but I was certainly participatory in it, as were most of us there at the unit at the time. And I actually have at the time, I was pretty strong in my opinions about going from the 40 to the 9, and had been for a while. It was kind of validating because for so long I was this little lone voice in the distance. Nobody cared about, hey, 9mm. And then other people in positions of authority came upon the idea on their own. It wasn't my influence, but I was there at the time, and I participated in a lot of the weapon selection and the ammunition testing while we were there. And I'll tell you what, for those who are shooters, when you're at work and you're getting paid and somebody backs up a pickup truck that is loaded fore to aft, port to starboard, 4 feet high, full of ammo, and says, you got to shoot this today. And you got like 10 of your buddies there. That's a good day. That's a real good day at work.
Oh yeah. I've had those days when I was instructor at the School of Infantry, same kind of thing, man. It's like, well, the privates are all gone and we got all this ammo left. We're not turning it in. Let's go.
We can't go back to the ASP with this.
No going back to the ASP. So we talked about the show you need to listen to. We talked about the article you need to check out, which is TC's article on ammunition selection. There's a link in here for you. It doesn't cost you anything to read it. But if you want to take advantage of all the premium training programs that we have in the American Warrior Society Training Vault, you're going to have to become a member. Doesn't cost you anything for the first 14 days. Get in there and check it out. Sorry about that, TC. Got to pay the bills with a little plug.
I'm a member.
There you go. There, look at that. And I wore my cardigan this morning since I was interviewing a man of letters. I wanted to make sure I looked the part.
Yeah, I wore a shirt and blazer, even though we're all COVIDed up, because I didn't want to gore anybody's sacred oxen when it comes to FBI stereotypes. So I thought, I should look at least semi-uptight in order to fulfill that.
Losing you. So, my friend, I've got some questions for you coming right out of your book here. One of the things that you wrote about, actually, you quoted someone talking about it's not just enough that you must kill the buffalo. Now, again, your book is on exploring professional psychological and physical reactions to deadly force encounters or something like that. You said you must make him understand that he has undergone a change of status. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I use in the book an example, the Miami-Dade Shootout with the FBI agents and another former AWS guest, Ed Morales. Handguns are, first of all, notoriously bad fight stoppers. I mean, we carry them because they're ubiquitous and they're easy to hide, and they'll be with us when the balloon flies. That's really the issue. But they're terrible at stopping a fight. And that's what you really want to do. Right? If you're forced to administer deadly force, if somebody else makes that choice for you, you want the fight to stop right now, right? You don't want it to stop in 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whenever, because time equals damage, right? The longer this goes on, the more damage happens, whether to you or bystanders or whoever. So my point to that was, if you have to administer deadly force, if the decision has been made for you and it's time now to get to work, don't dilly-dally. Right? You need to convince the other guy that the fight needs to stop. Now, how you're going to convince him, if we're talking about deadly force, you're going to, probably be shooting him, although Andy Bronco will tell you that the law is not particularly strident about how you administer deadly force, as long as it's proportionate and otherwise legal. But assuming that we're using a firearm, the idea that you might train to shoot once or twice and then reevaluate once or twice and reevaluate once or twice. It's just bad strategy. It's bad tactics. And that was my point there. You need to be trained to shoot someone into the ground, shoot them until they stop fighting. Whether that's because they're down and they've dropped their weapon or because they've decided, hey, this isn't going the way I had planned. I should probably, reevaluate the course of my life has taken this morning and do something else with my time. However, you stop the fight, but you've got to convince them that they've undergone a change of status. And people can suck up a lot of damage. Going back to the Miami-Dade shootout, both bad guys had non-survivable wounds in the opening moments of that fight. They were both dead for all intents and purposes, and yet they went on to kill 2 agents and wound several others. So putting 1 or 2 rounds on a guy who continues to fight is not really effective in terms of what we're discussing here. So that was the point that I was making there, is that we need to train people to be able to do that. And of course, that doesn't just encompass the mechanics of operating the firearm. It also encompasses knowing the law, because you can't just, spray and pray. There's a vast difference in domestic law enforcement or domestic application of deadly force by a civilian than there is in military application. And you also must know your chosen weapon, whether it's your hands, your feet, a broken bottle, your car, whatever it is you're using in lawful application of deadly force. You got to know what you're doing. And that takes training, as does the law part. Of course, all of this training breeds confidence, and confidence. I make a point repeatedly in the book that bad guys can smell it. Right? Bad guys are predators, and they can tell when someone knows what they're doing and when someone might be a victim. They can tell the difference between a fellow predator and prey. And bad guys don't necessarily want a fight. Some do, but by and large, most of them want to victimize. And confidence goes a long way in making the bad guy choose someone else. Mm-hmm. Or perhaps, in a lot of our street cops can tell you, if you show up and make it very clear, look, I can arrest you peacefully or not peacefully. It's up to you. But if you want to get it on, I'm here for you. What's the saying now? I can take you in cold, or I can take you in warm. They most of the time will say, you know what, today I'm going to take my chances with the legal system, not with you. And that, of course, is best for them and best for everyone involved. So,
yeah, that's a great point. Now, you've administered all level of force, and one of the reasons why you're not rotting away in some prison somewhere, I'm assuming, is because these were lawful, reasonable, and necessary uses of force. Can you dig into that just a little bit?
Well, of course. First of all, the only time I've ever used violence of any sort on another human being after college, because let's face it, college, and the occasional Donnybrook in the military, where at the officers' club when the tankers showed up and the infantrymen had to take umbrage. Other than those issues, it's always been governmentally sanctioned violence. People get on me because I own a gun or two, and I tell them, look, the only gun I've ever fired at another human being was given to me by the government. Mm-hmm. So ponder on that for a while. The reason I'm not in prison is because every time I've been forced to use or apply deadly force, it's been legal. Generally it's been overseas under the auspices of either the military or, overseas with the FBI. Of course, occasionally people will fight with you when you're in law enforcement, even at the federal level, which always makes me laugh when you decide to fight an FBI agent, because you're just now you're on the hook for another 5 years of mandatory prison time, and you're going to get beat, and it's just a bad idea. Yeah. But it's knowing the law. I mean, it's really what it boils down to. Know the law, know your rules of engagement if you're overseas, and stay within the bounds. And don't consider, it's a saying goes, if your only tool is a hammer, everything's a nail. Just because you got a gun doesn't mean everybody needs to get shot. You may want to shoot them. They may deserve to be shot. Doesn't mean you can shoot them, right? Doesn't mean it's legal. Because God knows there are plenty of people around here that could use a good beating every now and then, myself included, probably, if you ask my wife especially. But it doesn't mean you can do it. And so you have to be aware of that. And you can't give in to emotionalism of the moment. You have to be a cold, dispassionate applier of deadly force should it come to that.
One of the things, speaking of deadly force, another recurring theme throughout the book, TC, is, and I'm going to have to paraphrase a little bit, but basically it almost seems like you're saying, we need to put this up front when we're selecting our potential police candidates. Maybe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like, should we ask this person, this potential police recruit, can you take another human life to save yourself or maybe a member of the community? If so, why? I mean, is that something that you would recommend asking a potential police recruit?
I really, and I'm certainly not the first person to come up with this idea. Art Wall and Christensen in their works have discussed it, and it's a very good point. I mean, we do a bad job, I think, in preparing our law enforcement recruits for the single greatest responsibility we saddle them with, right? We put these people out on the street, sometimes at 22, 23, sometimes younger, depending on the department and their individual policies. We give them a gun and a badge, and we say, look, you're responsible for all these things, but one of them is, under the right circumstances, is the application of deadly force without prior judicial approval, based entirely upon your own decisions, right? You get to decide that. And we put that on people, and I think we all kind of acknowledge that in the back of our heads, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum. But we don't do a really good job of being upfront with our recruits, generally speaking. I'm painting with a broad brush here. I'm sure there are exceptions out there, of telling them this is what's out there. We give you a gun not because it's cool, not because hey, chicks dig it. That's not why we do this. We give you a gun because you may have to use it. Are you capable of using it? And as a result, we see time and again on these dash cameras, law enforcement officers who clearly should be applying deadly force, aren't, and they pay for it. They pay a very steep price for it. And I think that's on us as trainers, as a societal sort of force behind the training that we give people. And one of the questions you can ask people straight up when they're applying or in the application process is, can you kill another human being if you're required to, or can you apply deadly force to another human being? Of course, we're defining deadly force in here as that force which will either reasonably be expected to cause death or serious bodily injury. But make people answer that question, and don't give them a pass on just yes or no. Dig into it. You got to unpack that and really get down there and talk to people and put them in, even if it's just a thought exercise, put them in situations where they have to make that decision. Because to the extent we can have those people that cannot apply deadly force stay out of the profession, I mean no insult to those that might apply to. It's good for you, right? Because when this job gets dangerous, and it doesn't get dangerous all the time, but when it gets dangerous, it gets very dangerous very quickly. And while you're in a fight for your life in an alley at 2 a.m. with some methed out biker and a tire iron, that's not the time to figure out you cannot pull the trigger, right? You need to have figured that out long ago. And we used to have a thing in the FBI called the reality check that we would do at the firearms training unit. And it was a several hour block where we would have these conversations with the class. We wouldn't do it one-on-one because of time constraints, but we would have it with the entire class, and we would lay it out for them. This is what you're looking at. This is the kind of thing you will run into. And we would pass out the guns from the Miami-Dade shooting that the agents were carrying, the dead agents would carry, or the ones from Ogalla or other incidents where FBI agents had died, and say, look, that guy sat in your chair, Bobby Bureau, the new student here. That's where he sat 6 years ago. And this was the gun he was carrying when he died. And we would have these kind of really brutal conversations with people. And I think we owe it to them. We owe them the information to make an informed decision early on. I mean, if this is a person who's raising their hand and saying, look, I will go out and I will be a defender of our society. And I don't mean that with any hyperbole. That's exactly what these people do. We need to say, look, if you're willing to take that chance, we at least can give you a full set of information to make an informed decision as to whether or not this is the route you want to go. And so I think that is something we should absolutely enter into in our training paradigms, is having these conversations surrounding deadly force. It's not a huge time sink, but it's a critical time sink, I think. And I make that point in my book.
Another point you make in your book, and this is probably the only point that I'm going to, you talk about instruction, firearms instruction quite a few times, but I'm only going to bring up one of the quotes that you had. And at first, it kind of threw me for a loop. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I agree with you. And you say in the book, when it comes to firearms instruction, it's far more important that the instructor know how to shoot well than they be able to shoot well. And my first kind of reading of that, I'm like, well, let me read that again. And I got to thinking about it. I recently read something about one of the greatest boxing coaches of all time, a guy by the name of Ed.D. Fuchs or Custy Amato. Neither one of those guys were professional fighters, but they are easily number one and number two when it comes to boxing trainers. These are guys that never really had that job. That, if anything, they were amateur boxers. It would go on to train the greatest fighters of the 20th century. So I'm kind of leaning more into what you're saying there, TC. Can you unpack it a little bit, though?
Sure. And I'm the first to admit my opinion on this is probably different than some very famous, well-known firearms instructors out there, and that's fine. Let's have a conversation, right? Well-meaning people can disagree. My point in the book was, my example in the book was Bella Caroli, who was a gymnastics teacher for Nadia Comaneci, who was the first one to get a 10.0 in an international gymnastics competition. That guy couldn't do a backflip to save his life, right? I mean, he never got a 10 on a gymnastic competition ever. I'm not even sure if he ever was actually a gymnast. He might have been early in his career, but he's a fantastic gymnastics coach. You can't, and I know you've had this experience having gone to as many schools. You have, many of your viewers have probably had this as well. there are plenty of very, very good shooters, very accomplished shooters out there that cannot teach. They simply can't. And that's not a slight on them, but it's just a statement of fact. You need to impart information into people's heads that they can draw out later in that time of need. So just showing up on the range and, whipping out that hog leg and at 15 yards and 1.2 seconds and putting 2 rounds in a 4-inch circle, looking at the students and go, okay, do that. Yeah. It's really not getting the job done. Skill with the firearm, I think, is helpful. It will help establish your bona fides, especially if you're an unknown instructor, if they don't know who you are. But you still have to be a good instructor if you're going to instruct. If you're going to be a practitioner, be a good practitioner by all means. And a guy like our mutual friend Mike Seeklander, he shows up on the range. He's a known quantity, right? We know who he is. We know he's won stacks and stacks and stacks of trophies, and for good reason. And he's that rare combination of good practitioner and good instructor, which is why I enjoy taking classes with Mike. But in order to be a good instructor, it's a different skill set than being a good shooter. They can be complementary skill sets, but it's a different animal, teaching other people to be good shots. And that's my point here, is that, you can be a decent shooter, and that's helpful, but you really need to be a good instructor, and you need to know your business and know what you're about in order to be a good firearms instructor, particularly if you're going to teach gunfighting, which is a whole other animal than just picking up the gun, loading it, and unloading it, showing clear. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great answer. And like I said, Mike, and I believe he's on this morning, Mike, like you said, is the rare commodity of someone who can compete at the highest level and has the ability to break the components down and provide it to the student in a way that they can understand it, and then be able to coach them and stuff after the fact. So, but there are not many people out there that can do both. I want to shift gears a little bit here. Many times in the book, TC, you talk about speed's relativity in a deadly force encounter. And I would like for you to talk a little bit about where speed is relevant and relative.
Well, obviously, when the balloon flies, when the flag flies, get to getting, right? If you decided that deadly force has to be applied, time becomes a critical factor. I'm old enough to remember The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef.
Oh, yeah.
Tuco, the bad guy, at one point tells the guy right after he shot him, look, when it's time to shoot, shoot. Don't talk, shoot. And that's my point there. When it is time to, once you have crossed that threshold, and that's not a topic that I discuss a lot in the book. I leave it to others to discuss where that threshold is. Mm-hmm. But once you get to that point, you need to get it done. And the longer this fight goes on, this deadly force encounter goes on, the more people are going to get hurt. The more, time equals damage. I say it a lot. The longer there are bullets flying through the air, more bad things can go wrong. And, there's a ton of sayings in the training community, right? There's go slow in a hurry, move fast, shoot slow. You can't miss fast enough to win. Speed is fine. Accuracy is final. Hose your foes. There's a whole lot of that. But what I tell people is, look, don't become task saturated. Do what you got to do, and do it smoothly and fast. People get all, twisted up around the whole slow is smooth and smooth is fast phrase. I happen to agree with that phrase, but you can't just let it stop there, right? Okay, I'm going slow, so it's smooth, and smooth is fast. No, slow. But when you're learning, when you're on the up end of that curve, smoothing things out makes for speed, right? Like if you watch Mike, for example, morning Mike, he's an easy example to use. There's not a lot of wasted movement. When he goes to shoot, there's not a whole lot of arm flapping, foot adjusting, head tilting going on, right? Mm-hmm. His hand moves to his gun comes out, and now we're working the trigger. If you get into that unfortunate situation, you need to pare down your excess tasks, your excess movements. You need to get rid of all of that excess. And that includes thoughts, right? You need to concentrate on the task at hand, run the trigger, run the gun, and finish this fight. It needs to stop as quickly as possible. All these things take time. So you need to parse off all of the excess time you can. And it's funny because that's a very simple concept. It's just not an easy thing to do, right? So it's simple, not easy.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that as trained armed civilians, hopefully trained armed civilians, not just I got a gun, therefore I can go forth, and law enforcement officers, that training is what helps you out. That's what gets you to the victory circle. That's what saves your life. You should be better trained than your opponent. And if you're not, whether you're a law enforcement officer or a private individual, if you're not better trained than the bad guy, that's on you, right? You can blame your agency, and you can blame your agency from your coffin. All right, my agency killed me. The agency's not going to stop running, and you're still dead. That's your problem. You got to fix it. So get out there and fix it, right? Practice and train, but you've got to parse down that time, because the faster you get bullets on target, if it's a firearm situation in deadly force, the faster it's over and the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I agree totally. I'm going to skip around here on some of the questions I got, TC, just out of respect for your time. You mentioned one of the things that you bring up in the book a lot is confidence, the officer's confidence in their skills and abilities. And you state that says, I would like for you to discuss confidence and how predators can sense it and will not choose to fight. Instead, they will often submit. I totally agree with you, but how do we get to that point? And does a lack of confidence in the officer's skills and abilities lead to overreaction or underreaction or both? What do you think?
Well, the last question's easy, is yes. It does, in fact, lead to poor reactions, whether they're over or under. But confidence comes from training, right? Confidence comes from knowing what you're about. And, if you're a public speaker, for example, people get nervous when they're doing public speaking because they're not confident in their subject matter, and they're not confident in what they have to say. When you're confident in what you know and what you don't know, and you get up in front of a crowd, life is a lot easier. I mean, it may not be perfect, but it's a lot easier. The same with confidence. I can't tell you how many times that I dealt with people when I was working law enforcement, and knowing that, I'm having a conversation with them, and it's a violent, dangerous person, but knowing, look, he's 8 feet away from me. It's going to take him time to get to me, but I've put a chair between us. So if I have 2 seconds, I know I can get my gun out and I can put 3 rounds where I want them in that 2 seconds. So that gives me confidence, right? As long as I know I can slow him down from getting his paws on me for 2 seconds, then I'm going to win. And I will comport myself as such, right? Now, all of a sudden, this bad guy, so let's suppose he is violent and is looking to maybe fight. He's looking at me through that lens. Well, he can tell pretty quickly if I'm a predator or if I'm prey, right? If I'm displaying prey to behavior, I'm looking at my feet. I'm not confident. I'm not projecting my voice. I'm slouched. I look like, 20 miles of bad road in my cheap Sears suit and my, mismatched socks. These are all indicators to him that, what, this guy's a bag of rags. I can fight him and I can win and I can go home. As opposed to looking like I'm put together, looking like, look, I'm in charge of this situation, and your best bet is not to fight me, but rather to go quietly to prison or off to jail and get a lawyer and fight that way. You really need to project that. And I know that beat officers are typically taught in the academy. That's one of the key reasons that their uniform needs to be strapped and squared away, is not just to present a professional appearance to all and sundry, but to present that appearance to the bad guy, because the bad guy is going to make evaluations based on that. And Bureau did some research where they went and talked to cop killers in prison after all their appeals were expired, so they could be, confident that nothing that they said was going to be, used against them in an appeal process. And an often repeated mantra that they said was, "I fought the cop because I thought I could win. He looked bad. He looked like he wasn't ready to fight. He was in bad physical condition. His uniform was all messed up." Because these are typically people who've dealt with law enforcement over and over and over again. And it was the last time that they killed a cop. Well, why didn't they try previously? Well, because they didn't think they could, or, maybe their career has sort of ascended to that point where that was the next step. But nonetheless, they will try you if they think they can take you. Again, discounting people who are not quite in their right mind, the drunks and the drug addicts and what have you. I mean, those are the only people that ever really fought with me, were the people that weren't in their right minds. Mm-hmm. But of course, the FBI, we had a lot of significant advantages when it came to that sort of thing that the average patrol officer or private citizen might not have. Numbers being one of them, the ability to choose the time and place of the interaction, that sort of thing. But that lack of confidence can be a key indicator for prey behavior. There's this guy in Constance Friday, who's, I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but he has some good quotes. I mean, he's up there with Clint Eastwood in terms of, or Clint Smith in terms of quotability. And one of them, the things is, do not be afraid of what should be afraid of you. And I always kept that in the back of my head was, look, I shouldn't be afraid of this guy as an individual. He should be afraid of me because I'm here representing the federal government. And, don't go timid through the world, right? Timidity is the silent acceptance of bondage. Another Friday quote. You really need to project that confidence, and that will get you a long way. Confidence and situational awareness gets you a long way in this world.
Yeah. And I tell you, man, I think that really helped me. I'd had years as a bouncer, and then I got out of the Marine Corps, was a bouncer when I was waiting to become a corrections officer. Then I worked corrections. So I was used to dealing with the criminal element and felt confident fighting and wrestling inmates. And then I went onto the road, man. I was like, pretty confident in what I could bring to the table. And I think that a lot of people did not push it with me. However, we had a female who'd been on the department for, and I don't mean anything, this has nothing to do with her gender, just happened to be a female, but she was like maybe 98 pounds with her gun belt on, tiny little thing. And she was an attractive woman, small in stature and very timid, but she had been there long enough where she was our backup, right? And it seemed like she caused more problems. Anywhere she went, she got sent as backup, problems happened. And I'm just like, man, there's got to be a linkage here between this timid, tiny female that shows up as backup, and now the suspect really wants to party. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it sounds sexist to say it, but bad guys are sexist people, and they're looking for any perceived advantage. And if they perceive a female 98 pounds with a timid attitude as being an advantage to them, they're going to take that advantage.
Yeah.
I worked with a female for a while that fit that same description you had, but her nickname was Snake because she was just plain mean. I mean, I would tell people, look, you want to deal with me, because if you stop dealing with me, you're going to deal with her. And I'm telling you, she's going to bring a can of whoop ass like you never seen. And then you're going to go to federal prison. So really talk to me. And she'd be back there pacing just like, let's do this. Like, let's not do this. How about that?
I'm glad you bring that up because I know those females as well, man. They will. I had a female Marine one time. We were competing at one of the schools I went to, and we were doing log PT. We're in the mud trying to push the log, and she's just headbutting all the guys off the log, man. She was ruthless.
Yeah. So, it's just not the size of the dog in the fight, right?
That's right. One of the things you say here, TC, is I want to kind of skip over. You talk about the officer's state of mind having primacy of place. Can you discuss that? Also, you relate that one skill with their weapon, and I would submit, skills and a whole lot of other things, not just with the weapon, of course, whether it's a broken bottle, like you mentioned earlier, or what have you, is equally important. Can you talk about that idea of primacy of place with an officer's state of mind?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Shakespeare writes in Henry V, all things be ready if our minds be so. And it's absolutely true. I mean, you can have the best skills and the best weaponry, the best weaponry in the world. If you're not skilled in their employment and willing to employ them, they're worthless, right? I leave weapon undefined in the book in that particular section you're talking about for a reason, because what you choose to be your weapon it's the tool, right? Yeah. You are the weapon, as the saying goes. If you have, a nuclear weapon and you're not willing to use it, then you don't have a nuclear weapon, right? If you have a gun on your hip, but you're not willing to use it, you don't have a gun. Or you brought one for the other guy who is willing to use it. And when I talk about mindset, I'm not just talking about willingness. There's also a skill application or a skill set that you have to have, right? I mean, I may be willing to fight with you, Rich, but if you've been doing BJJ for the last 10 years and I've been sitting on the couch eating Cheetos, my willingness is not going to get the job done in all likelihood, or I'm counting on luck. And that's a very piss poor strategy. If you know you're in a position of advantage, if you know that you have the skills and you know that you have the willingness, then you probably are in a position of advantage. Dave Spalding. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please.
No, please.
Dave Spalding.
I was just coughing. Sorry.
Quotes in one of his books from John Wayne's last movie. And I'll paraphrase here, but he says, look, a lot of guys will hesitate when the moment comes to fight, right? Or the moment comes to draw their weapon. They'll scratch their nose. They'll do something to hesitate. I won't. I'll pull the gun. I'll pull the trigger. And that's the position you need to be in if you are going to utilize deadly force in your own self-defense. And if you're not in that position, doesn't make you a bad person, but perhaps you should reconsider your approach to this deadly force issue. But you have to have the mindset. Without the mindset, you just can't get it done. And that mindset, in that subset of mindset, I include skills, right? Because you have to have skills. If you don't have at least a modicum of skills, you're not in the game. You're simply not. And of course, in this particular game, the stakes can be very, very steep, very, very high. And so I would say get out of it if you can, if you don't have the mindset. There's the annals of law enforcement are rife these days with video of cops who should be administering deadly force and they're not, and they pay for it. The most famous example I can think of just sitting here is the Kyle Dinkkeller video, which is a lengthy but unfortunate video in which I'm sure you're familiar with it. Officer pulls over what it turns out to be an emotionally disturbed guy. Guy gets out of the car. Things escalate very quickly. Guy is clearly in emotional distress of some sort, but he ends up climbing back into his car and loading his firearm. And the cop just keeps telling him, "Don't move, don't move, don't move, don't move." Just kind of vapor locks on that. And the bad guy eventually, gets his gun prepared, comes out shooting. And it's only after rounds are flying at the police officer that he gets in the fight. Well, by then it's too late. And it ends tragically because the officer didn't have the right mindset. And I don't, by no means do I wish to cast aspersions on an officer who paid that steep a price for us all. But at the same time, I think we dishonor him in his service if we don't learn from him. And he's only one example. We have a lot of examples where people have paid that price because they weren't in a position to administer deadly force or any level of force when they needed to. It's a cautionary tale for us all.
Well, and I think to your point, in that case, Officer Dinkkeller, he paid with his life, but in Scott Peterson's case down in Parkland, a lot of, 17 young children paid for his inability to, use his weapon, right?
Exactly true. And so this is my point in the book. And I think it's a point that this isn't some blinding flash of insight. This is just what we should all kind of realize. You have no business doing this if you are not mentally prepared to do it. Look, I wouldn't mind driving a NASCAR professionally, right? That'd be kind of fun. But I don't have the mindset to do that. I mean, I get out there, you put me in a car doing 150, 200 miles an hour, I'm just going to be like white knuckling it and hope I don't die, right? Yeah. So I have no business getting behind the wheel doing that. Being a fighter pilot, that'd be kind of cool, but I probably don't have the mindset for it. Or pediatric oncology is the one I use a lot. God love those people that'll do it. I don't have the mental bandwidth or capacity to do that job and stay sane. I just couldn't. And I'm glad there are people that can, but I recognize pretty early on that I'm not one of them. The same is true when it comes to deadly force application. If you can't do it, it doesn't make you a bad person, but it does mean you probably shouldn't get in this line of work.
You still there, TC?
I am. You locked up for a second there. I don't know.
Yeah. I want to this will be the last question, TC. I want to respect we've had you on here for going on 5 minutes. The comments that you make, and I'm going to paraphrase it in the book, you said the idea that officer friendly can become a ruthless killer and then back again. You mentioned that idea, and it goes back to something we had in the Marine Corps for a long time. This was the 3-block war concept. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with the concept.
It dovetails in with your idea really well that on block 1, the corporal, the non-commissioned officer in charge of the squad, on block 1, they might be doing humanitarian mission, right? Then they move over to block 2. They're doing a peacekeeping mission, trying to keep the warring factions away from what the other squad's doing on block 1. And then on block 3, it's full on urban warfare. And then we rotate back to block 1, and we have to make those mental adjustments that, oh, I'm not shooting people anymore. I'm handing out blankets, and now I'm keeping 2 tribes apart. And oh no, I'm shooting. And I love that idea. But my question to you, I guess, as someone who studied this, Is this an innate psychological trait that some people have or they don't, or is this something we can train people to do?
I think both. I think there are people out there that are incredibly mentally flexible and nimble and can make those shifts very, very quickly. How they got to that point, I will leave to smarter people than I. But I certainly hope it can be trained. I believe it can be trained because we have to train. I mean, if we can get a Marine corporal to do that, or an Army private to do that, I think that we should be able to get law enforcement officers to do that. But we have to train them, right? And that's a significant difference between the training we give law enforcement and the training we give soldiers. I mean, when I was in, we were just starting to look at peacekeeping missions as a viable, mission for our military, with Bosnia, kind of calming down and starting to, they were talking about putting us in there to do that. And that's a vastly different mission than, seek out and destroy the enemy by means of fire and maneuver, right? I mean, that's a whole different animal to be able to turn that on and off. That's asking a lot of anyone. Being able to ask that of our law enforcement officers, I think, is a little bit more reasonable, because the law enforcement officers tend to be a little older, and we have a lot more control over the individual ongoing training for them. And that's the mission for law enforcement, right? They need to be able to talk to people on the street in their community policing role, let's say, and then suddenly something pops off and now they have to put on a different hat and, be a ruthless killer. And it sounds terrible. I mean, I recognize the baggage that phrase ruthless killer brings with it. But if a bad guy puts you in that situation, then that's exactly what we as a society expect you to do. We expect you to stop this fight right now. If we have a spree shooter like in Parkland, we don't expect you to hide behind a pillar and call for help. We expect you to hide behind a pillar, call for help, and then get in there and stop the killing. And if that means you need to become a ruthless killer, then that's what you need to do. So yeah, I think it can be trained. And I think some people bring that with them to the table originally. Do I still have you, or your picture seems locked up on me? Yep, locked up. Boy, I hope you all are still looking at Rich and not me. He's an easier person to look at than I am. Rich, I cannot hear you if you're still talking. I am seeing the little indicator says it's still live.
Here.
Ah, there you are. Hello, sir. Man, you locked up on me again. Or perhaps I locked up on you. Technical difficulties. Better get that producer back in here. Oh, am I the host now? That's terrifying.
Wi-Fi is not good out here in the country where I live. Let's see if we can get Dr. Fuller back.
I hear you now, Rich.
We'll go ahead and sign off. There you are.
Yeah, there you go. People are telling me on my phone that I'm the host all of a sudden. I'm like, oh, that's terrifying. Nobody wants that. It's just a good thing I didn't stand up. I may or may not be wearing pants right now. That would be terrifying for people all over the world. Rich, your Wi-Fi is killing us, buddy. You're killing us. I had all kinds of good stuff I was going to talk to you about violence as a societal good, but now I've lost you and I feel lost and leaderless. And I can't see you all here. Oh, there you are.
Hey, let's go ahead and close this.
I think you were trying to
TC, thanks for coming.
I don't know if everybody is hearing Rich block up or not, but I think he's trying to close up the show.
Yeah, you there?
Yeah, you're off and on. You're very intermittent.
Hey, tell everybody.
I'm going to assume Rich wants me to tell everybody, thank you very much for tuning in so early this morning and listening to what we had to say. I'm also going to assume that he would like you to go to the American Warrior Show and the American Warrior Society online. I would recommend that you go to thehorusgroup.net, which is my website. You see what I'm all about. If you're looking for my book, it's for sale on Amazon or from the publisher directly, but I tend to buy directly from Amazon. So that's where I would say go look for it. Rich, you were doing some kind of stutter step dance on my video feed, and I'm hopeful that what I'm saying is coming across and I said what you wanted to be said.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, TC. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rich. I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Guys, thanks for joining us. Sorry about.
He's terribly sorry about the technical difficulties, and he will be firing his producer later today. Thank you all very much for watching. I appreciate your time.